My sister added me to a secret family group chat by accident. They were planning Christmas without me. I sat in my apartment staring at my phone screen as 47 messages rolled in one after another. My mother wrote, "Make sure she does not find out." My brother-in-law replied, "Just tell her the wrong date like last year." I took a deep, shaky breath, screenshotted every single message, and sent one reply to the chat. "Merry Christmas, your realtor will explain the rest." What happened the next morning would shatter my family's perfect facade forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And if you have ever been the black sheep of your family, hit that like and subscribe button for more stories about claiming your worth. My name is Renee. I am 34 years old and I work as a forensic accountant here in Washington, D.C. For my entire life, I was the family scapegoat. I was the quiet one who preferred numbers to networking, the one who never measured up to my parents' high society expectations. But they severely underestimated me. The morning after I sent that message, I woke up before dawn. The air in D.C. was bitterly freezing, a thick layer of snow dusting the sidewalks of the historic neighborhood where my grandmother's brownstone stood. This house was the only place in the world I had ever felt truly safe. Growing up while my parents were busy climbing the social ladder at their elite country clubs and church functions, my grandmother was the one who nurtured me. Since she passed away, I had been living in the brownstone, quietly paying the taxes and the upkeep, while my family completely ignored both me and the property. I pulled my car onto the familiar tree-lined street, expecting to find the house quiet and empty. Instead, my stomach dropped into my shoes. A massive commercial moving truck was parked right on the front curb, its heavy tires crushing the winter grass my grandmother had loved so much. I threw my car into park and stepped out into the freezing cold. There, standing on the snow-covered lawn, were four strange men tossing my personal belongings into cheap cardboard boxes. My books, my winter coats, the antique lamps I had spent hours restoring, all being carelessly dumped onto the frozen ground like garbage. And standing on the porch, orchestrating the entire scene with an arrogant wave of his hand, was Preston. Preston is my sister Alicia's husband. He is a corporate real estate developer, a wealthy white man who always treated my African-American family with a thinly veiled condescension. My mother Vivian and my father Desmond were obsessed with appearances. They viewed Preston not just as a son-in-law, but as a status symbol. They let him make snide comments about our culture and my career just because his firm was highly successful. Beside him stood Alicia, wrapped in a designer cashmere coat, sipping a vanilla latte and laughing loudly at something he said. Alicia was the golden child, a public relations executive who wore her Howard University alumni status like a crown, while secretly drowning in hidden credit card debt. I walked up the driveway, my boots crunching loudly against the ice. "What exactly is going on here?" I demanded, keeping my voice perfectly steady despite the anger boiling in my chest. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, but I remembered the golden rule of my profession. Never show your hand until you have all the receipts. Alicia stopped laughing and rolled her eyes, looking me up and down with absolute disgust. "Look who finally decided to show up." She sighed, taking another sip of her latte. "We are cleaning out the trash, Renee. Try not to make this difficult for once in your life." I stepped past her, moving toward one of the workers who was holding a box of my grandmother's vintage jazz records. "Put that down right now," I ordered him. "You have no legal right to touch my things." Preston stepped off the porch, physically blocking my path to the front door. He adjusted his expensive wool scarf and gave me that familiar patronizing smirk he always reserved just for me. "Actually, Renee, we have every right," he said smoothly, speaking to me as if I were a slow child. "Your parents hired my development crew this morning. We are clearing out the property to prepare for a major renovation." I looked at Preston, refusing to let his physical presence intimidate me. I squared my shoulders and looked him dead in the eye. "You cannot renovate a house you do not own," I stated flatly. Preston chuckled a low, grating sound and reached into the inside pocket of his tailored overcoat. He pulled out a crisp, folded piece of paper and held it out to me between his index and middle finger. It was a bank check. I took it, glancing at the amount written across the front. $500. Go get your hair done, Renee, Preston said, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. Consider it a generous relocation bonus from the family. This neighborhood is gentrifying rapidly, and my development firm just bought this old shack from your parents for $1.5 million. You have exactly 10 minutes to leave the premises before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. I stared down at the insulting piece of paper in my hand. $500 to erase my existence. $500 to wipe away the only home I had left. Alicia was busy checking her reflection in her phone camera, completely unbothered by the fact that she was rendering her own flesh and blood homeless on Christmas Eve. A lesser woman would have screamed. A lesser woman would have cried and begged them to stop. But I simply folded the check, slid it into my pocket, and offered them a chilling smile. I am not going to argue with you on a frozen lawn, Preston, I said softly. I will see you both at the closing table tomorrow morning. Before I could walk to my car, the heavy crunch of tires on ice broke the freezing morning silence. A silver Mercedes-Benz glided to a halt behind Preston's commercial moving truck. I recognized the vanity plate immediately. My mother Vivian and my father Desmond stepped out into the winter air. My mother was dressed impeccably in a tailored wool coat, her hair perfectly styled, as if she were heading to a luncheon for her elite sorority alumni chapter. She ignored the boxes of my personal belongings scattered across the snow. She did not ask why her youngest daughter was standing in the freezing cold without a jacket. Instead, her eyes darted nervously toward the windows of neighboring houses. She marched up the driveway, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement, and grabbed my arm for the second time that weekend. "What is wrong with you, Renee?" my mother hissed, keeping her voice low but entirely lethal. "Why are you out here creating a public spectacle on Christmas Eve? Do you know who lives on this street now? There are federal judges and corporate executives moving into this neighborhood. You are embarrassing the entire family in front of Preston and all of these workers. Stop being so dramatic and get your things out of the snow." I stared at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the winter weather. "I am not the one who threw my belongings into the yard, Mom," I replied, my voice dangerously calm. "Your son-in-law hired a crew to illegally evict me from grandmother's house." Alicia stepped off the porch, her designer boots sinking slightly into the snow. She let out a loud, theatrical sigh, positioning herself right next to our mother like a loyal soldier. "Oh, please, Renee, stop playing the victim," Alicia scoffed. "You have been squatting in Grandma's house for 5 years rent-free. You should be thanking us for finally pushing you out into the real world so you can get a life." I looked at my sister, taking in her smug expression and the way she clung to Preston's arm. "Squatting," I repeated. "I have been paying the property taxes, fixing the plumbing, and maintaining this historic home while you were busy trying to keep up with the country club wives." Alicia rolled her eyes and took another sip of her expensive latte. "You are just a glorified calculator, Renee. You sit in a cubicle looking at spreadsheets. Mom and Dad paid for my Howard University tuition because I actually have a future to build. I have a brand. I have a public relations firm to run. You do not need a 4-bedroom brownstone in a premium zip code just to sit around and be lonely." My father approached us, stepping carefully over a box that contained my favorite childhood books. Desmond Washington was a man who worshipped at the altar of respectability. He had spent his entire career working in local government, always bowing his head to wealthy developers and politicians. To him, Preston was the ultimate prize, a wealthy white corporate real estate developer who elevated our family status simply by association. My father stopped in front of me, his expression hardened into a mask of patriarchal authority. "That is enough arguing," he commanded, looking directly at me. "Your sister is right, Renee. We had a family meeting about this last month, which you would have known about if you ever bothered to engage with us properly. The family needs this sale to go through today." I looked at my father, the man who used to read me bedtime stories, now standing shoulder to shoulder with the man trying to throw me onto the street. Why do you need the sale to go through so desperately, Dad? I asked, refusing to break eye contact. Why are you selling off the only piece of generational wealth this family has ever owned? My father adjusted his expensive collar and sighed, as if explaining basic math to a toddler. Preston and Alicia are ready to close on a massive new estate in the suburbs, he said proudly. It is a beautiful property in a highly exclusive gated community. They need liquid capital for the down payment and renovations. We are selling this old house to Preston's firm for $1.5 million, so your sister can have a home that reflects her status. You are a single woman with no prospects, Renee. You need to learn independence. The audacity of his words washed over me like a physical blow. They were trading a piece of our family history, a home my grandmother had scrubbed floors for decades to buy, just so Alicia could live in a sterile McMansion to impress Preston's snobby relatives. They were willing to render me homeless on a holiday weekend just to maintain the illusion of Alicia's perfect lifestyle. My mother crossed her arms, her face tight with impatience. Take the $500 check Preston generously offered you and go find an apartment, Renee. The movers will drop your boxes wherever you tell them to. Do not ruin this Christmas for your sister. We are signing the final closing documents tomorrow morning, and we expect you to be gone by the time we are done. I stood in the freezing cold, surrounded by the people who were supposed to protect me. I looked at my mother's obsession with social status. I looked at my father's blind deference to a man who secretly despised our culture. I looked at my sister's vain, empty smile. And finally, I looked at Preston, who was watching me with an expression of absolute unchallenged victory. They truly believed I was nothing but a quiet, pathetic woman who would just take the abuse and fade into the background. They thought my silence was a sign of weakness. They had no idea it was actually the discipline of a woman who analyzed data and built airtight cases for a living. I did not cry. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the insulting $500 check Preston had given me. I smoothed out the creases, folded it neatly, and placed it back into my coat. Then I looked right at Preston's smug face and let a terrifying smile spread across my own. $1.5 million, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the winter air. You are getting scammed, Preston. I turned my back on all of them, walked steadily down the driveway, and unlocked my car door. See you all at the closing table tomorrow morning? I called over my shoulder. I got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove away, leaving my family standing in the snow with no idea that the ground beneath their feet was about to completely cave in. The morning sun reflected off the glass facades of downtown Washington with a cold brilliance. It was Christmas morning. Most families were sitting around a tree opening presents or preparing a massive dinner. My family was sitting in a luxury conference room at a high-end real estate title office on K Street. They had demanded a holiday closing, paying an exorbitant premium just so they could have their $1.5 million deposited before the end of the tax year. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the lobby, feeling the plush carpet beneath my leather heels. I was not wearing my usual comfortable clothes, the ones they loved to mock. I wore a tailored charcoal designer suit that fit me perfectly, carrying a thick leather briefcase that held the weight of my entire defense. I pushed open the frosted glass door of Conference Room B. The scene inside was exactly as I had pictured it. Vivian and Desmond were sitting at the expansive mahogany table, sipping complimentary champagne from crystal flutes. Alicia was taking a selfie with her glass, making sure the expensive art on the office wall was in the frame. Preston sat at the head of the table looking at his gold watch with a smug expression of total satisfaction. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, the room froze. Alicia lowered her phone. The smile vanished from my mother's face, replaced instantly by a look of sheer venom. "What are you doing here, Renee?" Vivian demanded, setting her champagne flute down so hard the crystal chimed dangerously. "This is a private commercial closing. You have absolutely no business being in this building." I walked calmly toward the empty chair directly across from Preston and sat down, placing my briefcase on the polished wood. I told you yesterday I would see you at the closing table, I replied evenly. I am just keeping my promise. My father stood up, his face darkening with anger. He looked toward the glass wall of the conference room, searching for an employee. I am going to have security throw you out right now, he said, his voice rising in that familiar authoritarian tone he used to terrify me with when I was a child. You are not going to ruin this day for your sister. Preston chuckled, leaning back in his leather executive chair and crossing his arms. Let her stay, Desmond Preston said, his voice dripping with his usual white savior arrogance. If Renee wants to sit here and watch us finalize the transfer of her little squatter camp, let her watch. Maybe seeing a real multi-million-dollar transaction will inspire her to get a real job. I did not flinch. I just folded my hands over my briefcase and waited. The silence in the room stretched out heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of Alicia nervously tapping her acrylic nails against her phone case. She was looking at me differently today. Maybe it was the suit, or maybe it was the complete lack of fear in my eyes, but I could see the first tiny crack of doubt forming in her perfect facade. She knew I never bluffed. A moment later, the door handle turned. The title agent, a middle-aged man named Mr. Caldwell, walked into the room. But he was not smiling. He was not carrying the complimentary gift basket or the final settlement checks they were all eagerly waiting for. He was holding a single thin manila folder, and his face was completely drained of color. He looked sick to his stomach. He avoided looking at Preston and walked straight to the center of the table. Finally, Preston said, uncrossing his arms and picking up a gold pen from the center tray. Let us get these signatures done. I have a flight to catch this afternoon. Mr. Caldwell did not distribute the papers. He placed his hands flat on the folder and swallowed hard. Mr. and Mrs. Washington. He began, his voice wavering slightly as he looked at my parents. I am afraid we have a very serious problem here this morning. We cannot proceed with the closing. My mother let out a sharp, impatient breath. What do you mean we cannot proceed? We paid your firm a massive fee to process this today. If this is about a missing signature, we are all right here to sign whatever you need. It is not a missing signature, Mrs. Washington, the title agent said, pulling a document from the folder. He slid the paper across the mahogany table toward my parents. The issue is that we ran the final deep title search this morning before the wire transfers could be authorized. The listing agreement you signed with Mr. Parker's development firm is entirely invalid. You do not own the property on Elm Street. The air left the room. Nobody moved. Alicia stopped breathing. Preston dropped his gold pen. It clattered loudly against the wood. What did you just say? Preston demanded, his voice losing every ounce of its smugness. My father snatched the document from the table, his eyes scanning the legal jargon rapidly. This is a mistake, he shouted, slamming his fist down on the mahogany table so hard the champagne glasses rattled. This is my mother's house. She bought that brownstone 40 years ago. She passed away and left it to us in her will. We are the legal heirs. You people need to fix your paperwork right now before I sue this entire firm. I unclasped the brass locks of my leather briefcase. The sharp click echoed in the silent room. I slowly reached inside and pulled out a stack of certified legal documents with thick blue state seals stamped on the front. I slid them across the table right over my father's shaking hands. Grandma did not leave it in a will, Dad, I said, my voice perfectly level and quiet. She knew exactly what you and Mom would do to that house the second she died. She knew you would sell off our history to the highest bidder just to buy designer clothes and country club memberships. She did a ladybird deed transfer 5 years ago. Alicia stared at the paper, her eyes wide with terror. A what? She whispered. A ladybird deed, I repeated, looking right at her. It is an enhanced life estate deed. It meant Grandma retained full control of the property until the exact second she passed away. And the moment her heart stopped beating, the house automatically transferred to the designated beneficiary without ever going through probate. It bypassed her will completely. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and let my eyes lock onto Preston's pale face. She transferred the deed to a private LLC, Preston. My LLC. You cannot buy a house from people who do not own it. The silence shattered into a million jagged pieces. Alicia was the first to react. She lunged forward so quickly, her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Her perfectly manicured hands slapped violently against the mahogany table. "It is a fake!" she screamed. Her voice cracked in a way that completely ruined her polished public relations persona. "She forged it. That is a forgery. Preston, call the police right now and have her arrested for fraud." Mr. Caldwell took a nervous step back, holding his hands up defensively to shield himself from my family's collective rage. "I assure you, Mrs. Parker, this is a legally binding document," he said. His voice trembled under the heavy tension in the room. "It was filed and recorded with the District of Columbia Real Estate Records Division exactly 5 years ago. I pulled the certified copies directly from the city archives myself this morning. The seal is authentic. Your sister is the sole proprietor of the limited liability company that holds the absolute title to the Elm Street property." My father looked as though he had been struck by physical lightning. His chest heaved as he turned his furious gaze upon me. "How did you swindle my mother?" he demanded. His voice was thick with a booming rage that used to make me cower in my childhood bedroom. "She was an elderly woman. You manipulated her into signing away our family legacy just so you could steal it from your own flesh and blood. You are a disgrace to the Washington name." I did not shrink back. I did not apologize. I simply opened my leather briefcase again and pulled out a second folder. This one was noticeably thicker than the first. I placed it gently on the table. "Nobody swindled anyone, Dad," I said. My voice cut through his anger with cold, clinical precision. "Let us talk about what actually happened 5 years ago. Do you all remember that luxury Mediterranean cruise you took? The one Alicia begged for because she just had to have photos in Santorini for her social media feed. The one you and Mom paid for to celebrate Preston officially becoming a partner at his commercial firm." My mother crossed her arms tight against her chest, her face deeply defensive. "What does our family vacation have to do with this blatant theft?" she snapped. "We deserved that trip. We worked hard for it." "It has everything to do with it," I replied, staring directly into my mother's eyes. "Because while the four of you were drinking expensive champagne on a yacht off the coast of Italy, Grandma received a notice of default from the city. She had been hit with a massive property tax lien, $50,000 in back taxes, and severe penalties that she could not afford on her fixed retirement income. The city was going to put the historic brownstone up for public auction in 30 days. The color began to drain from my father's face. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a firm hand to stop him. "Do not pretend you did not know," I warned him sharply. "She called you. She left 4 separate voicemails begging for your help. And you ignored her because you did not want to ruin Alicia's perfect European vacation. You let your own mother face eviction so you could keep up appearances." So I stepped in. I drained my entire retirement savings. I emptied my 401k account, took the massive early withdrawal penalty, and paid the city every single cent to save the house from the auction block. Grandma was so horrified by your selfish neglect that she demanded we transfer the deed to my company that very same week. She wanted to ensure that none of you could ever touch it or sell it out from under her. She trusted me to protect our legacy from your greed. For a long moment, the heavy truth of my words hung in the stifling air of the conference room. Vivian looked down at her lap in shame. Desmond stared blankly at the wall. Even Alicia seemed momentarily speechless. But Preston, ever the arrogant opportunist, let out a loud, condescending laugh. He clapped his hands slowly, a sarcastic, mocking rhythm that echoed sharply off the glass walls. "What a touching family drama," Preston sneered. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and leaned heavily over the table, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "You are a real hero, Renee. Truly an inspiration to us all. But unfortunately for you, your little real estate maneuver does not change the reality of this situation one bit. You see, a formal listing contract was signed by your parents acting as the presumed executors of the estate. And more importantly, serious money has already changed hands." I raised an eyebrow, sitting perfectly still and letting him talk. Preston gave me a sickeningly sweet smile, the exact kind he used when he was about to crush a small minority business owner in a ruthless corporate buyout. I already wired a $300,000 non-refundable earnest money deposit to secure this transaction, he stated proudly. The corporate funds have cleared. The contract is legally in motion. By accepting that massive deposit, the estate has entered into a binding agreement. You can play all the emotional games you want with the deed, but legally you have to honor the sale. He pointed a long, pale finger at me. You are going to sign that house over to my firm today, Renee, or my corporate lawyers will tie you up in federal court until you are completely bankrupt. You will not have a dime left to your name. He leaned back in his executive chair, clearly expecting me to panic. He expected the quiet, passive sister-in-law to fold under the threat of aggressive litigation from a wealthy white developer. He thought his money made him untouchable. I did not panic. I did not even blink. I calmly reached into my briefcase one last time and pulled out my digital tablet. I tapped the glass screen, entering my security passcode, and brought up a highly detailed financial tracing report. I looked at Preston, watching the arrogant smirk still plastered across his face. Are you absolutely sure you wired that $300,000 to my parents' account, Preston? I asked softly. Preston frowned, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his features. What are you talking about? Of course I sent it to their account. I authorized the wire myself. I turned the tablet around and slid it smoothly across the mahogany table so the glowing screen was facing him directly. Because as a forensic accountant I track money for a living, I explained, my voice echoing clearly in the silent room. I trace hidden corporate assets, I expose massive fraud, and I know exactly how to follow a digital paper trail. So let us take a very close look at where your firm's $300,000 wire transfer actually went. I grabbed the presentation cable resting in the center of the massive mahogany table and plugged it directly into my tablet. The large flat screen mounted on the conference room wall flickered to life. I could hear the sharp intake of breath from my mother. The champagne glasses sat forgotten. I tapped the screen, and a highly detailed financial flowchart appeared in bright colors. It traced the exact path of the $300,000 Preston claimed to have sent to my parents. My father frantically pulled his smartphone from his suit pocket. His hands were trembling as he opened his mobile banking app. He stared at his screen, his thumbs swiping down to refresh the page over and over again. The money is not here, he whispered, looking up at Preston with sheer panic. You said the wire cleared yesterday. Preston remained rigidly still in his leather executive chair. The arrogant smirk was entirely gone, replaced by a cold and calculating stare. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. I stepped toward the television screen and pointed to the final destination of the wire transfer. The money cleared Preston's corporate account, I explained, keeping my tone perfectly level and professional. But it was never routed to the Washington Family Trust. Instead, the funds were sent to a holding account registered to an entity called Apex Holdings, LLC. My mother gripped the edge of the table. What is Apex Holdings? She demanded, her voice shrill with confusion. Is that a subsidiary of your firm, Preston? I did not give him the chance to lie to her. Apex Holdings is a shell company, I stated clearly. It is a ghost entity registered in Delaware, a state famous for allowing corporate owners to hide their true identities. But as a forensic accountant, I know exactly how to peel back those layers. I filed a rapid discovery request yesterday afternoon, and the registered agent for Apex Holdings is none other than Preston Parker. Preston slammed his hand flat against the table. You have absolutely no right to dig into my private corporate structures, Renee, he barked, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. This is a massive violation of privacy. I laughed, a short and humorless sound. When you use that ghost company to try and force a fraudulent real estate transaction involving a property, I legally own your privacy no longer exists, I fired back. My father looked back and forth between us, his mind struggling to comprehend the betrayal unfolding right in front of him. Why would he send the deposit to his own shell company? My father asked, his voice cracking with the weight of the realization. If he is buying the house for his development firm, why hide the money? I pressed another button on my tablet. A second legal document appeared on the television screen right next to the bank trace. It was a preliminary commercial purchase agreement. Because Preston was never buying the house for his firm, I revealed watching the absolute horror wash over my parents' faces. He is acting as a shadow buyer. I broke the scheme down for them piece by piece, making sure they understood the exact magnitude of what their perfect son-in-law was attempting to pull off. The gentrification in our old historic district was not just bringing in wealthy new neighbors. It was bringing in massive corporate mega developers looking to buy up entire blocks for luxury condominiums. Preston knew this. He used his inside access to our family to manipulate you into selling. He offered you $1.5 million, convincing you it was a generous family favor. I pointed to the second document on the screen. But this contract shows that Apex Holdings Preston's secret shell company is slated to sell the exact same property tomorrow afternoon to a global commercial firm. And the sale price listed on that contract is exactly $4 million. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning vent. I watched the truth sink into my father's eyes. Preston was going to buy the property for a fraction of its worth, use his hidden Delaware company to flip it the very next day, and pocket a massive $2.5 million profit. He was quite literally robbing the Washington family. He was stealing $2.5 million of generational wealth right out of the pockets of his own vulnerable in-laws. The racial dynamic of this theft was glaringly obvious, hanging in the air like a thick fog. This wealthy white developer had married into an established African-American family, smiled in our faces at Thanksgiving dinners, and used that trust to strip us of the only piece of historic equity my grandmother had managed to build. My father looked like he was going to be physically sick. He clutched his chest, staring at the man he had practically worshipped for years. "You were stealing from us." My father breathed out, his voice shaking with a profound and devastating heartbreak. "You were going to take our legacy and flip it behind our backs." Everyone slowly turned to look at Alicia. She was his wife. She was the golden child of the Washington family, the woman whose lavish lifestyle and expensive university degree had been funded by the very parents Preston was currently trying to scam. She sat frozen in her chair, staring at the $4 million figure glowing on the television screen. Her mouth hung open in absolute shock. My parents waited for her to explode. They waited for their perfect daughter to turn on the man who had just tried to ruin them. They waited for her to scream at him, to defend the family that had sacrificed everything to give her a beautiful life. Instead, Alicia's expression shifted. The shock melted away, replaced by something hard and utterly ruthless. She looked at our devastated parents, their faces pale and pleading, and then she turned to me with eyes full of pure venom. She reached out and gripped Preston's arm tightly, pulling herself closer to him. "Preston is a businessman," Alicia yelled, her voice echoing sharply off the glass walls of the conference room. "He found the deal. He did the work to secure the commercial buyer. He deserves that profit." Alicia's words hung in the sterile air of the conference room like a foul odor. "He deserves that profit." I watched my father's face contort with a mixture of profound shock and rising fury. Desmond Washington had spent his entire life demanding respect, building his identity around being the patriarch of a successful, well-regarded black family. He had practically worshipped the ground Preston walked on, viewing his white son-in-law as the ultimate validation of our family's upward mobility. And now his golden daughter was openly defending the very man who had just orchestrated a calculated, cold-blooded plan to rob him of $2.5 million. My father turned his wrath toward Preston, his voice booming with the kind of rage I had only ever seen directed at me. "You parasitic fraud!" Desmond shouted, his chest heaving under his tailored suit. "You sit at my dinner table, you drink my wine, and you smile in my face while treating my family like an easy mark. You really thought you could steal my mother's legacy and flip it to a commercial developer behind my back." Preston did not even have the decency to look ashamed. He just adjusted his cuffs and leaned back, letting my father yell. But the true horror of the moment did not come from Preston's arrogant silence or my father's bruised ego. It came from my mother. Vivian Washington did not gasp. She did not yell at the man who had just tried to swindle her husband. She did not even look at Alicia. Instead, my mother turned her entire body toward me. Her eyes were wide, almost manic, completely devoid of the refined country club elegance she usually projected. She slammed her hands down onto the mahogany table, making her diamond rings click sharply against the wood. "None of that matters right now," Vivian snapped, her voice shrill and desperate. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "You are going to sign that deed over to Preston today, Renee. I do not care what his private business arrangements are. I do not care who he sells it to tomorrow. We agreed to a purchase price of $1.5 million, and we need that money cleared and deposited into our account immediately." The entire room went dead silent again. Even Preston looked mildly surprised by my mother's complete disregard for his massive betrayal. My father stared at his wife of 38 years, as if she had suddenly grown a second head. "Vivian, what are you talking about?" Desmond asked, his voice dropping to a confused, heavy whisper. "He just tried to steal millions of dollars from our family. He played us for absolute fools. And you want her to sign the house over to him anyway." "We need the money, Desmond!" my mother screamed, her voice breaking in a way that sounded entirely unhinged. "We need that $1.5 million right now. Renee, you selfish, ungrateful girl, you are going to pick up that pen and you are going to transfer the company over to your sister's husband. If you ruin this closing, if you walk out of this room without signing those papers, you are dead to me. You will never be part of this family again." I sat perfectly still, observing the woman who had spent my entire life telling me I was not polished enough, not ambitious enough, not worthy of her pride. I watched the way her chest rose and fell in shallow, panicked breaths. I looked at her perfectly styled hair, her expensive pearl necklace, and the limited edition designer purse resting on the leather chair beside her. Then I looked at her hands. They were shaking violently. The confident, condescending matriarch of the Washington family was absolutely terrified. And suddenly the final piece of the puzzle clicked perfectly into place. "You do not care about the flip, do you, Mom?" I said softly, my voice a stark contrast to her hysterical screaming. "You do not care that Preston was going to pocket $2.5 million of grandmother's equity. You are completely blind to his theft because you are drowning in your own." Vivian flinched as if I had struck her. Her face drained of all color, leaving only the stark lines of her expertly applied makeup. "Shut your mouth," she hissed, though her voice had lost its volume. "You do not know what you are talking about. You are just a bitter, jealous woman trying to tear this family apart." I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into my heavy leather briefcase for the third time that morning. I pulled out a slender red folder and placed it gently onto the table. I rested my hands on top of it, feeling the smooth paper beneath my fingertips. "You needed this closing to happen today on Christmas morning, because the fiscal year ends in exactly 6 days," I explained calmly, holding my mother's terrified gaze. "You were willing to let your own mother face a tax auction. You were willing to let Preston steal from your husband. And you were willing to throw my belongings into the snow, all because you desperately needed your share of that $1.5 million before January 1st. My father was looking back and forth between me and my mother, his confusion rapidly turning into a deep, sinking dread. "Vivian," he said slowly, "what is she talking about? Why do we need the money before January 1st? My mother could not look at him. She stared fixedly at the red folder under my hands, her breathing growing more erratic by the second. She looked like a trapped animal. I opened the red folder. I pulled out a stack of bank statements, highlighted spreadsheets, and internal financial audits. "I am a forensic accountant, Mom," I reminded her quietly. "I do not just trace corporate wire transfers. I trace everything. And when I saw how desperate you were to force this rapid under-the-table sale, I decided to take a very close look at your personal finances. Specifically, the accounts you manage for your prestigious social circles." Alicia shifted in her seat, her defensive posture faltering. "Mom, what did you do?" she asked, her voice suddenly sounding very small. I slid the first bank statement across the table toward my father. You should look at this, Dad, I said gently. Tell him, Mom. Tell Dad why the elite sorority alumni, chapter the one you have been the national treasurer of for the past 4 years, is currently missing $200,000 from its scholarship endowment fund. My mother physically collapsed into the heavy leather chair behind her, as if all the bones in her legs had suddenly turned to dust. The designer purse she loved so much slid off her lap and hit the floor, spilling her expensive cosmetics across the carpet, but she did not even reach down to pick it up. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking completely hollow. She gasped for air, her chest heaving, her eyes darting frantically around the room, looking anywhere but at my father. Desmond Washington stood frozen at the edge of the mahogany table. The anger that had just been radiating from him only seconds ago vanished, replaced instantly by a state of pure, unadulterated shock. He slowly turned his head to look at his wife of almost 40 years. He looked at her as if she were a complete stranger who had just wandered into the room. "Vivian," he whispered, his voice trembling so badly it was barely audible. "Vivian, tell me she is lying. Tell me right now that you did not touch the scholarship endowment money." My mother could not speak. Her perfectly painted lips parted, but no sound came out. She just stared at her shaking hands, her silence serving as the loudest confession she could possibly give. I did not wait for her to find her voice. I was not there to offer grace. I was there to deliver the absolute truth. I opened the red folder resting on the table and pulled out the thick stack of financial audits I had compiled over the past week. I spread the papers out across the polished wood, displaying the undeniable evidence of her betrayal. "You have been running a classic lapping scheme for exactly 24 months, I stated, letting my professional training take the wheel." The numbers were clear and unforgiving. As the national treasurer for your elite alumni chapter, you had exclusive unmonitored access to the community scholarship funds. The money that was supposed to go to hardworking young Black women trying to afford their freshman year at historical Black colleges. You started small 2 years ago, skimming just enough to cover Alicia's initial country club initiation fees. But then, as Alicia's demands grew, your theft grew right along with them. I pointed to the highlighted sections on the top page, making sure my father could see the red ink. By the middle of last year, you were transferring thousands of dollars every single month out of the endowment and directly into a secondary checking account. You used that stolen money to fund Alicia's extravagant lifestyle. You paid for her exclusive country club monthly dues, you bought her those limited edition designer bags she loves to flaunt on social media, and you covered the exorbitant catering bill for her vanity public relations launch party. You stole $200,000 from your own sorority sisters just to maintain the illusion that your favorite daughter was a wealthy, successful executive. My father grabbed the edge of the table to steady himself. He looked sick. His entire world, his pristine reputation, the high society image he and my mother had spent their entire lives cultivating, was crumbling into dust right in front of him. "You stole from the scholarship fund," he asked my mother again, a single tear spilling over his eyelid. "To buy purses." Alicia jumped back, her eyes wide with a manufactured desperate panic. She immediately threw her hands up in the air, backing away from my mother as if Vivian had a contagious disease. "I did not know anything about this," Alicia cried out, her voice shrill and defensive. She looked at Preston, then at our father, playing the role of the innocent, victimized daughter perfectly. "I swear I had no idea where that money was coming from. Mom told me she was giving me her personal savings. I thought it was an early inheritance. I would never take stolen money. Mom, how could you do this to me? How could you involve me in your crimes?" I looked at my sister, feeling a deep wave of revulsion. Even now, with our mother having a complete breakdown, Alicia was only trying to save herself. She was willing to throw the woman who had committed a federal crime just to buy her love directly under the bus. I reached into the folder one last time. "I do not tolerate liars, Alicia," I said, my voice dropping to a low, hard pitch. I pulled out a thick packet of printed text message logs and tossed them directly in front of her. The pages scattered across the table. I subpoenaed these records during my financial discovery process. These are the encrypted text messages between you and Mom over the last 18 months. Alicia stared down at the printed pages, her face turning an ugly mottled gray. She stopped playing the victim and started breathing heavily, realizing she was completely trapped. "Let me read my personal favorite to the room," I offered, picking up the top page and reading the text verbatim. "On October 12th of last year, you texted Mom saying the lease payment for the luxury sport utility vehicle is due on Friday, and Preston will kill me if he finds out I am broke again. Please just borrow another $5,000 from the sorority fund. I will pay it back when my next client signs, I promise." I dropped the paper back onto the table. "You explicitly told her to borrow from the fund, Alicia. You knew exactly where the money was coming from. You knew she was embezzling it, and you encouraged it because you cared more about driving a luxury car than you cared about your mother going to federal prison. Both of you are drowning in lies, and you needed this $1.5 million house sale to close today so you could quietly repay the sorority account before the annual end-of-year audit next week. You were going to use my house to cover up your federal crimes." The silence in the room was absolute. My father dropped his head into his hands, sobbing quietly. Preston was staring at the wall, doing the mental math on how this would ruin his own corporate reputation. My mother was completely catatonic. The perfect Washington family had finally been exposed for exactly what they were. From the corner of the room near the frosted glass doors, Mr. Caldwell nervously cleared his throat. The title agent had been standing there the entire time, clutching his own folder, watching the destruction of our family with wide, horrified eyes. He took a hesitant step forward, looking incredibly uncomfortable. "I am so sorry to interrupt," Mr. Caldwell said, his voice trembling as he looked at my parents. He adjusted his glasses and swallowed hard. "But given the nature of what was just disclosed here, I am legally obligated to report this." The Federal Bureau of Investigation agent, waiting out in the front lobby, requested that I let him know the exact moment the Washington family arrived for the closing. Mr. Caldwell's words dropped into the center of the conference room like a live grenade. For a split second, nobody even breathed. Then the absolute reality of what was happening crashed down upon them all at once. My mother let out a sharp wailing sound and physically slumped forward over the mahogany table, burying her face in her arms as her perfectly styled hair fell around her shaking shoulders. She was weeping uncontrollably now, mourning the sudden death of her pristine socialite identity. My father stood up, knocking his heavy leather chair backward. It hit the frosted glass wall with a loud thud that echoed through the quiet office. He pointed a trembling finger at me, opening his mouth to yell, but no words came out. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the destruction happening in his perfect life. Alicia rushed to my mother's side, pulling out her phone and frantically swiping at the screen, muttering blindly that she needed to call a defense attorney right this second. But while my family descended into a spiral of panic and tears, I kept my eyes focused entirely on the only other person in the room who actually understood the grave reality of federal involvement: Preston. He did not go to comfort his wife. He did not ask my mother what she had done or try to calm my father down. While the Washingtons panicked, Preston smoothly and silently reached across the table. He grabbed his gold pen, snapped his expensive laptop shut, and slid it into his designer leather briefcase. His movements were incredibly precise, the practiced, hurried motions of a man who was used to cutting his losses and escaping before the wreckage hit him. He turned his back on the crying women and took a quiet step toward the secondary door at the back of the conference room. It was a private exit that led directly down a back stairwell to the underground parking garage, bypassing the main lobby where the federal agent was waiting entirely. I anticipated his cowardice. Before his hand could even brush the brushed steel handle of the door, I moved. I stepped smoothly into his path, positioning my body squarely in front of the heavy glass door. I crossed my arms over my chest and tilted my head, looking up at him with a cold, unforgiving stare. "Leaving so soon, Preston?" I asked, my voice cutting cleanly through the sounds of my mother's hysterical sobs. "We have not even talked about your offshore accounts yet." Preston froze in his tracks. His pale blue eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time since the day I met him, the smug, superior confidence was completely wiped away. "What are you talking about, Renee?" he demanded, his voice low and suddenly very dangerous. Move out of my way right now. This dramatic family mess has absolutely nothing to do with me. I am not getting dragged into your mother's embezzlement charges. I shook my head, slowly, refusing to yield a single inch of space to him. Oh, Preston, I said softly. You really think you are the smartest person in the room. You really think you could use my family as a convenient front for your financial crimes and just walk away clean while they take the fall. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his neck strained. I do not have time for your paranoid delusions, he spat, taking another step forward and trying to use his physical size to intimidate me into stepping aside. I did not flinch. I just looked right back into his panicked eyes. When I started digging into Apex Holdings to find out who was trying to steal my grandmother's house, I did not stop there, I explained. My tone was clinical, exactly the way I presented findings to a corporate board. I ran a full-spectrum forensic audit on your primary commercial real estate firm. I followed the digital paper trail of every single property you have flipped over the last 3 years. Preston stopped breathing. The color drained from his face so fast he looked almost translucent under the fluorescent lights. I found the pattern, Preston. I continued speaking loudly and clearly so that my father and Alicia would hear every single word. I found the wildly inflated appraisals. I found the fake corporate buyers registered to anonymous post office boxes in the Cayman Islands. I found the millions of dollars moving constantly through dummy escrow accounts to clean dirty money for your wealthy foreign investors. You have been using fake commercial real estate closings to launder money on a massive federal scale. Alicia stopped crying. She slowly stood up, leaving my mother slumped on the table and stared at her husband in absolute horror. Preston, she whispered, her voice trembling violently. Is she telling the truth? What did you do? Preston completely ignored his wife. He kept his eyes locked firmly on me, a desperate cornered look spreading across his face. You have no proof of any of that, he growled, his knuckles turning stark white as he gripped the handle of his briefcase. You are bluffing. I smiled a cold, victorious smile. I submitted a highly encrypted 300-page dossier to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Cyber and Financial Crimes Division exactly 1 week ago, I replied calmly. I included the bank routing numbers, the wire transfer receipts, and the digital signatures connecting you directly to the offshore accounts. The agent sitting out in the lobby is not just here to arrest my mother for stealing sorority funds. He is here to arrest you for federal money laundering and wire fraud. The facade finally shattered completely. The polished, educated, wealthy, white savior persona that Preston had weaponized to manipulate my family for years dissolved into pure, unfiltered hatred. The polite corporate vocabulary vanished. He dropped his briefcase. It hit the polished floor with a heavy thud. He lunged forward, stopping mere inches from my face. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, his eyes practically bulging out of his skull with blind, desperate fury. He leaned down, his face twisted into an ugly, cruel snarl, stripping away every last ounce of his supposed civility. He used a deeply offensive racial slur, the kind of hateful word that carried centuries of violence and degradation. He spat the word at me with so much venom that the air between us felt completely toxic. You are nothing but a bitter, lonely black woman who could not get a man, he hissed, his face red with unhinged rage. You are just jealous of Alicia. You are jealous of everything we have, so you decided to destroy it all because you are miserable and pathetic. The vile word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was a word that should have shattered the glass walls of that luxury conference room. It was a word that should have instantly ended any relationship, any business deal, any quiet agreement between civilized people. Preston stood there with his chest heaving, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred, completely unapologetic for stripping away his polished corporate disguise to reveal the racist core underneath. I did not look away from him. I did not shed a tear, but I did slowly turn my head to look at my father. Desmond Washington had spent his entire life demanding respect. He had built his identity around being a proud, strong patriarch of a highly educated black family. He practically demanded that everyone in our community bow down to his achievements. I waited for the explosion. I waited for my father to cross the room to grab Preston by his tailored lapels to physically remove the man who had just used a racial slur against his own daughter. I waited for the fierce parental protection that Alicia had enjoyed her entire life. My father took a step forward, but he did not look at Preston. He looked at me. His face was completely drained of color. He looked like a man who was watching his entire universe burn to ash and was desperately grasping at the floating embers. He walked right past Preston, ignoring the blatant disrespect, ignoring the sheer violence of what had just been said. He stopped directly in front of me. His hands were shaking just as badly as my mother's had been. "Renee," my father said, his voice dropping to a frantic, hoarse whisper. "You have to listen to me right now. You have to stop this." I stared at him, feeling a new profound level of disgust settle into my stomach. "Stop this," I repeated, my voice perfectly flat. "He just called me a slur. Dad. He just told you he is laundering money. Mom is facing federal embezzlement charges, and you are telling me to stop." He reached out and grabbed my forearms. His grip was tight, desperate, his fingers digging into the fabric of my suit jacket. "He is just stressed, Renee," my father pleaded, his eyes darting toward the frosted glass doors where Mr. Caldwell had disappeared to alert the federal agent. "Preston is under a massive amount of pressure right now, and he misspoke. But we can fix all of this. We can save this family before that agent walks into this room." I looked at the man who had raised me, realizing with absolute clarity that I was looking at a complete stranger, a coward who cared more about his country club memberships than his own child. "How exactly do you plan to fix federal wire fraud and embezzlement, Dad?" I asked, letting him expose the full depth of his moral bankruptcy. My father leaned in closer, his breath smelling stale and panicked. "You sign the deed over to Preston right now," he begged, the words tumbling out of his mouth in a frantic rush. "The title agent already prepared the transfer paperwork. If you give Preston the house, he can proceed with the flip tomorrow. He can take that $2.5 million profit and immediately pay off his commercial partners. If he balances his corporate ledgers before the end of the day, the federal investigators will not have any missing funds to trace. They will have to drop the case." I stood perfectly still, letting his delusion wash over me. "And what about Mom?" I asked coldly. "If you do this for him, Preston will quietly replace the $200,000 your mother borrowed from the sorority endowment," my father reasoned, completely buying into his own desperate fantasy. "He will wire the funds directly to the alumni account this afternoon. No one will ever know the money was missing. Your mother will not go to federal prison. Alicia will not lose her husband. We can walk out of this building and go back to normal. You have to save the family, Renee. You have to make the sacrifice." I looked past my father's shoulder. I saw my mother, who was still slumped over the table, refusing to look at me, refusing to apologize for stealing from her own community. I saw Alicia standing perfectly still, watching me with eager, greedy eyes, silently praying that I would give up my grandmother's legacy, just so she could keep her luxury sport utility vehicle and her racist husband. And I saw Preston adjusting his tie, a faint glimmer of arrogant hope returning to his pale eyes as he watched my father do his dirty work for him. My father was literally asking me to take the fall for a man who despised me. He was asking me to reward a criminal who had just spat a racial slur in my face. He was asking me to bankrupt my own future just to save my mother from the consequences of her own shallow, materialistic crimes. He wanted me to protect the Washington family image, an image built entirely on lies, debt, and fraud. Every single emotional tie I had left to these people withered and snapped in that exact moment. The years of seeking their approval, the years of hoping they would finally see my worth, all of it simply evaporated into thin air. I felt lighter than I had in my entire life. I looked directly into my father's pleading, pathetic eyes, and then I laughed. It was not a joyful sound. It was a cold, hard, ringing laugh that echoed off the high ceiling of the conference room. The sound made my father flinch and drop his hands from my arms. It made Alicia take a nervous step backward. "You want me to sign the house over to Preston so he can save his shell company?" I asked, the sharp edge of my amusement cutting through the thick tension in the room. You want me to give him the property so he can flip it tomorrow? Yes, my father said eagerly, nodding his head. Yes, Renee, it is the only way to save your mother. I slowly closed the brass locks on my leather briefcase. The sharp click sounded like a final judgment. Dad, I cannot give Preston the house, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper, because I sold it yesterday. The words seemed to hang suspended in the cold air of the conference room. My father stared at my face as if I had spoken in a foreign language. He blinked slowly, his mind completely unable to process the absolute finality of my statement. Sold it, my father repeated, his voice barely a hollow breath. How could you sell it? You do not have the authorization from the estate. I do not need authorization from an estate that does not own the property, Dad, I reminded him smoothly. I told you 20 minutes ago that Grandma transferred the deed to my limited liability company 5 years ago. And as the sole managing director of that company, I have the absolute legal right to liquidate its assets. So yesterday afternoon, while Mom was frantically checking her sorority bank accounts and Preston was busy drafting fake purchase agreements for a house he did not own, I sat in a different title office across town. I signed over the entire limited liability company, including the absolute title to the Elm Street property. Preston looked as though the floor had just opened up beneath his expensive leather shoes. The aggressive red color in his face drained away, instantly replaced by a sickly, chalky white. You are lying, Preston stammered, gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly his knuckles looked like polished bone. You could not have sold it. I put a hold on the title search. I had my guys monitoring the municipal registry all week. You were monitoring the property deed, Preston? I corrected him, allowing a small smile to touch my lips. But I did not sell the deed. I sold the LLC that holds the deed. It is a private corporate transfer. It does not trigger a public real estate registry alert until the corporate tax filings are updated at the end of the quarter. For a man who uses shell companies to launder money, you really should have seen that coming. Alicia let out a high-pitched gasp. She looked at her husband, watching the terrifying realization wash over his features. But what about the money? Alicia demanded, her voice shrill and trembling. If you sold it, where is the money? Mom needs that money today. I sold it for its true market value. Alicia, I answered quietly. $4.5 million. Every single penny of it went directly into an irrevocable trust designed exclusively for Grandma's continuous medical care and her eventual legacy planning. None of you will ever see a single dime. Before anyone could scream or protest, the heavy frosted glass doors of the conference room swung open. Mr. Caldwell stepped aside, looking completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of dramatic events unfolding in his office. Two people walked into the room. They were not federal agents. They were an older black man and a distinguished black woman, both wearing immaculate professional suits. They carried themselves with a quiet, undeniable dignity that instantly commanded the space. Dr. Marcus Vance and Mrs. Eleanor Reed, I said, introducing them to the stunned silence of my family. They represent the African American Historical Preservation Society of Washington. They are the new legal owners of the Elm Street brownstone. Dr. Vance offered a polite but firm nod to my parents. It is an honor to meet you, Mr. and Mrs. Washington, he said, his voice rich and steady. Your mother's home is a vital piece of this city's history. It was one of the first properties built and owned by free black citizens in that district. When Renee reached out to us and explained that the home was in danger of being sold to commercial developers and demolished for luxury condominiums, our board of directors convened an emergency session. Mrs. Reed stepped forward, clutching a leather portfolio. We mobilized our private donor network within 48 hours, she added, looking directly at Preston with an expression of complete disdain. We purchased the corporate entity holding the property yesterday. We are currently working with the City Council to have the brownstone officially designated as a protected cultural heritage site. It will be fully renovated and transformed into a community museum honoring the historic black neighborhoods of the district. It will stand forever. No corporate developer will ever be able to tear it down. My father slowly sank back into his chair. The reality of what I had done finally broke through his thick wall of arrogance. I had not just stopped their sale. I had permanently locked the property away in a historical trust. I had protected my grandmother's legacy by giving it back to the community they had all tried to abandon. But while my parents sat in stunned, devastated silence, Preston was hyperventilating. His chest heaved erratically. He was looking at the television screen where his fraudulent $4 million commercial flip contract was still projected in bright colors. He began running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, ruining the expensive cut, muttering frantic calculations under his breath. His $300,000 earnest money deposit was completely locked in escrow limbo. His $4 million flip to the global commercial firm was now a breached contract. But worst of all, he had promised that prime real estate to his offshore investors. He had used their dirty money to fund his side of the transaction. He owed incredibly dangerous people millions of dollars, and he had absolutely no asset to give them. His shell company was empty. His bank accounts were about to be frozen by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He was completely trapped. Preston's breathing grew ragged. The polished corporate executive was entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered criminal who realized his life was essentially over. He turned his head slowly and locked his frantic, bloodshot eyes onto Alicia. Alicia shrank back from him, her hands trembling as she held her expensive designer purse against her chest like a shield. "Preston?" she whispered, her voice wavering with genuine terror. "Preston, it is okay. We can call your lawyers. We can fix this." "Fix this!" Preston roared, the sound tearing through the room like a physical shockwave. He lunged toward her, his face twisting into a mask of pure, ugly rage. He pointed a shaking finger right at her face. "You told me she was stupid, Alicia. You told me your pathetic little sister was just a low-level accountant who pushed papers all day. You swore to me she would never check the corporate paperwork. You promised me she would just roll over and sign the estate documents like a good little obedient dog." Alicia pressed her back against the mahogany table, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I did not know," she sobbed, holding her hands up defensively. "I swear, Preston, I did not know she could do this." "You stupid, useless woman!" Preston screamed, completely losing his mind. "Because of your idiotic family, I am going to federal prison. The people I owe money to are going to destroy me." He raised his arm, and with a violent, sweeping motion, he shoved Alicia hard. She let out a sharp cry as she stumbled backward, her heels catching on the plush carpet. She crashed heavily against the glass wall of the conference room, sliding down to the floor in a heap of designer fabric and shattered pride. Alicia scrambled back against the frosted glass wall, her chest heaving as her hands frantically rubbed her bruised shoulder. She looked up at the man she had worshipped for years, the man who had provided her perfect high society life, and finally saw him for what he truly was, a sinking ship. And Alicia Washington was not the kind of woman to drown for anyone. The illusion of their flawless power couple status shattered completely, replaced by raw, ugly self-preservation. "You are a monster!" Alicia screamed, her voice echoing shrilly through the large room as she pulled herself up from the floor. "You are completely broke, and you are trying to take me down with you." She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Preston, looking wildly at my father. Then at Mr. Caldwell, spewing every toxic secret she had been hiding to maintain her perfect image. "He has been taking out second mortgages on our investment properties for months just to cover his massive gambling debts. He maxed out every single one of my personal credit cards last week to pay off some shady offshore contractor because his accounts were empty. He told me the federal investigators were just conducting a routine corporate tax audit. He lied to me every single day. He used my name and my social security number to register his dummy corporate accounts so he could hide the money." Preston lunged forward again, his face turning an apocalyptic shade of purple, but my father finally found his footing and stepped between them. My father held his hands up, physically blocking Preston from reaching his golden daughter. "Shut your mouth, Alicia!" Preston roared, the veins in his neck bulging against his starched collar. "You gladly turned a blind eye and spent the dirty money when it bought your luxury cars, your European vacations, and your exclusive country club memberships. You knew exactly what I was doing to keep you in the lifestyle you demanded. But Alicia was not listening to his insults anymore. Her panicked eyes darted frantically around the conference room and landed squarely on me. The terrifying realization of her impending poverty hit her like a physical blow. She saw the $4.5 million I had just secured for our grandmother's estate, and her primal survival instincts kicked into high gear. She pushed past my father and stumbled toward me, ignoring the fact that she had just tried to orchestrate my ruin. Her hands reached out in a desperate grasping gesture. "Renee," she begged, dark streaks of mascara running down her ruined, tear-stained face. "Renee, you have to help me right now. We are sisters. You cannot just lock all of that money away in a historical trust fund. I am going to lose my house. The bank is going to foreclose on everything by the end of the month." Preston maxed out my credit cards and left me with absolutely nothing. "You have to share that money with me. You have to give me my share of the $4.5 million. I am your family. We share the same blood." I looked down at my older sister. I stared at the golden child who had spent her entire life mocking me, belittling my corporate career, and treating me like the family servant. The woman who had sneered at my clothing, dismissed my intelligence, and plotted to steal my only sanctuary. Now she was begging for scraps from the very real estate deal she had arrogantly tried to steal from me. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical disgust. I looked at Alicia and took a slow, deliberate step back, putting physical distance between her desperate hands and my suit. "You want to talk about family now?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady so the words would strike with maximum impact. "You want to claim sisterhood today, after everything you have done?" I shook my head slowly, feeling an overwhelming sense of closure. "You literally planned to leave me homeless on Christmas Eve, Alicia." I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "I saw the text messages. I saw the secret group chat where you and Mom laughed about changing the locks on the brownstone the minute the sale went through. You were going to throw me out onto the street in the dead of winter without a second thought, just to fund your pathetic fake lifestyle and pay off your husband's criminal debts." Alicia gasped loudly, her hands flying to cover her mouth as she realized the full extent of my knowledge. She realized there was no lie she could spin, no excuse she could manufacture to save herself. "You do not get a dime," I told her, making sure every syllable landed like a hammer strike. "You will not see a single penny of Grandma's money. You can lose your massive house. You can surrender your luxury cars to the bank. You can figure out exactly how to survive on your own for the first time in your spoiled, entitled life." Alicia opened her mouth to wail again, her face contorting as she prepared to throw the ultimate tantrum to manipulate her way out of the corner. But the heavy wooden doors of the main office suddenly swung inward, hitting the wall with a loud bang that made everyone in the room jump. The sound completely cut off whatever excuse Alicia was about to make. Three men in dark tactical windbreakers with the words Federal Bureau of Investigation printed boldly in yellow across the back strode purposefully into the conference room. The remaining air in the room vanished. Preston froze entirely, his hands dropping limply to his sides as he stared at the armed agents, his shoulders slumping as he waited for the inevitable arrest. My father backed slowly against the frosted glass wall, pulling my weeping mother with him into the corner. But the lead federal agent did not even look at Preston. He walked with heavy, echoing footsteps directly past the disgraced real estate broker, his sharp eyes locked onto a target that nobody in the room expected. The agent stopped right in front of my sister. The lead agent stood directly over my sister, his shadow falling across her tear-stained face. Alicia was still sprawled on the carpet where Preston had violently shoved her. She looked up at the federal agent with wide, uncomprehending eyes, pulling her designer purse closer to her chest, as if the expensive leather could somehow protect her from the government. "Alicia Washington," the agent said, his voice completely devoid of emotion, "stand up and place your hands behind your back." The words hung in the air for a long second. My mother, who had been huddled in the corner with my father, suddenly let out a piercing, guttural scream. It was the sound of a woman watching her absolute favorite creation being ripped apart. She lunged forward, her arms reaching out blindly, but my father grabbed her waist and dragged her back, pinning her against the frosted glass wall. He knew better than to interfere with federal law enforcement. Alicia did not move. She just sat there, shaking her head from side to side, her blonde highlights sticking to her wet cheeks. "There must be a mistake," Alicia whimpered, looking from the agent to Preston, and then to our parents. "I did not do anything wrong. Preston is the one with the offshore accounts. Preston is the one who flips the properties. I am just his wife. I do not even look at the ledgers." The agent reached down and grabbed her by the upper arm. He pulled her to her feet with practiced, effortless strength. "You are under arrest for interstate wire fraud, identity theft, and the forgery of real estate documents," he stated, pulling her arms firmly behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting closed around Alicia's wrists echoed through the quiet conference room. It was the heaviest, most final sound I had ever heard. Alicia screamed, twisting her shoulders in a useless attempt to escape the cold steel binding her hands. "Preston," she cried out, her voice breaking into a hysterical sob. "Preston, tell them to stop! Tell them I did not do this!" I stepped forward, smoothing the front of my suit jacket. I looked at my sister, watching the golden child finally experience the consequences of her own arrogance. "You really should have read the documents before you signed them." "Alicia," I told her, keeping my voice low and completely steady. Alicia turned her head to look at me, her eyes wild with panic. "What are you talking about, Renee?" she sobbed, pulling against the agent's grip. "What documents?" When Preston initiated this fraudulent sale, I explained, walking slowly toward her, he needed to open an escrow account to make the transaction look legitimate to his foreign investors. He wired a $300,000 earnest money deposit from a shell company in Delaware to this title agency in Washington. But to legally open that escrow, someone had to sign the preliminary deed of sale on behalf of our grandmother. Someone had to forge her signature to start the legal transfer. I paused, letting the silence stretch out, letting the terrible reality sink into her mind. "Preston is a lot of things," I continued, "but he is not stupid enough to forge a signature on a federally regulated document himself." He knew that the moment that wire transfer crossed state lines, the forgery became a federal crime. He needed a scapegoat. He needed someone completely naive and entirely motivated by greed to hold the smoking gun. Alicia stopped struggling. She looked at Preston, her breath catching in her throat as the horrifying truth finally dawned on her. She remembered the late night in his home office. She remembered him handing her the pen, pouring her a glass of wine, and telling her that she just needed to practice Grandma's signature to secure their future. She remembered signing the fake deed completely blind to the trap he was setting for her. "He set you up, Alicia," I said quietly. "He made you commit federal wire fraud so his hands would remain clean." Alicia stared at her husband. The man she had defended, the man she had flaunted in front of me for years, the man she had planned to steal my inheritance with. "Preston," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of his ultimate betrayal. "How could you do this to me?" Preston did not look apologetic. He did not look guilty. He simply reached up and adjusted the knot of his expensive silk tie. He straightened his tailored suit jacket and rolled his shoulders back completely, regaining his arrogant composure. He looked at the federal agent and offered a cold, dismissive smirk. "She signed the paperwork, Officer," Preston said, his voice dripping with condescending innocence. "I had absolutely no idea my wife was committing real estate fraud behind my back. I am just as shocked as you are. I thought she had the legal authority to manage her grandmother's estate. I am fully prepared to cooperate with your investigation." He threw her to the wolves without a single second of hesitation. He offered up his own wife to save his own skin, sacrificing her freedom just to buy himself a little more time to deal with his angry investors. Alicia let out a sound that was less of a cry and more of a dying gasp. Her knees buckled, and if the federal agent had not been holding her arms, she would have collapsed onto the floor. She just sobbed, her entire body shaking violently as the agent began reading her rights. My mother could not take it anymore. The sight of her precious Alicia in handcuffs, betrayed by her wealthy husband, and facing years in federal prison completely broke her mind. She ripped herself out of my father's grip. She stumbled across the room, her designer shoes tangling in the plush carpet. But she did not run to Alicia. She did not run to the federal agents or to Preston. My mother dropped to her knees right in front of me. She crashed down onto the floor, the heavy thud of her knees hitting the wood, sending a shockwave through my own feet. She threw her arms out and grabbed my legs, burying her face into my pants. She was crying so hard she was choking on her own saliva, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into my calves. "Renee," my mother wailed, looking up at me with a face completely distorted by desperation and terror. "Renee, please, I am begging you. I am begging you on my hands and knees. You have to save your sister. You have $4.5 million in that trust account. You have all of that money. You have to use it right now. You have to hire the best criminal defense attorney in the country. You have to buy her freedom, Renee. Please, she is your sister. She is my baby. Do not let them take her away." I looked down at the woman kneeling on the floor. My mother was clutching the fabric of my trousers, her tears soaking into the wool, babbling incoherently about using the $4.5 million to save her favorite child. She was completely unhinged, her pristine socialite facade entirely gone. She did not care that Alicia had just tried to steal my only sanctuary. She did not care that Preston had just called me a vicious racial slur right in front of her. All she cared about was the golden child being dragged away in handcuffs, and she was entirely willing to sacrifice my financial security to prevent it. I did not reach down to help her up. I simply took a slow, deliberate step backward, forcing her hands to slip off my legs. Her grip faltered, and she collapsed completely against the carpet, weeping loudly into her hands. "I will not spend a single penny of my grandmother's legacy to protect a thief," I told her, my voice cold and unwavering. Alicia made her choice when she picked up that pen. Then I lifted my gaze from the pathetic scene on the floor and looked directly across the room at Preston. He was still standing near the frosted glass wall, straightening his cuffs, wearing that sickeningly arrogant smirk. He actually thought he had won. He believed that by throwing his own wife to the wolves, he had successfully severed his legal ties to the fraudulent deed. He thought he was walking out of this building a free man, ready to hire expensive lawyers and distance himself from the Washington family disgrace. I took a slow step toward him, watching his smirk falter, just a fraction of an inch. "You really are a coward, Preston," I said loudly, ensuring the federal agents heard every single word. "You thought you were so incredibly clever having Alicia forge the signature so your hands would remain perfectly clean. You thought the physical signature on the printed paper was the only thing the authorities would care about." Preston narrowed his eyes, his jaw clenching tightly. "She signed it," he spat back, gesturing toward his weeping wife with total disdain. "I had absolutely nothing to do with the estate transfer. I was just the broker handling the listing. You cannot prove I knew it was fake." I shook my head slowly, feeling a deep, radiating wave of satisfaction. "Do not worry, Preston." I told him, my tone conversational, but absolutely lethal. I made sure the Federal Bureau of Investigation had the complete digital picture before they ever stepped foot in this building. When I submitted my forensic audit last week, I did not just include a scanned copy of the forged document. I included the raw digital files and the hidden metadata attached to them. I gave the federal agents the exact Internet Protocol address of the computer that originally drafted the fake deed and initiated the offshore wire transfer. Preston froze completely. The arrogant color that had just started to return to his face vanished entirely, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. He stopped breathing. I smiled a cold, victorious smile. "It was your secure corporate laptop, Preston." I continued enunciating every word clearly so it would echo in his ears. "The exact same laptop sitting inside that expensive leather briefcase right now. Alicia may have been stupid enough to forge the physical signature with a pen, but you drafted the digital document. You set up the dummy escrow account. You routed the $300,000 deposit from your shell company. You orchestrated the entire wire fraud scheme from your own personal device, and the digital paper trail leads directly back to your desk." The second federal agent, who had been standing silently near the wooden doors, stepped forward. He did not hesitate for a single second. He walked straight up to Preston, grabbed him by the shoulder of his custom suit, and forcefully spun him around. Preston let out a shocked gasp as his face was shoved against the frosted glass wall right next to his hysterical wife. Preston Washington. The agent said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering. Put your hands behind your back right now. The sound of the second pair of handcuffs clicking shut was like music to my ears. The golden couple, the pristine, perfect Washingtons, who had looked down on me for my entire adult life, were now standing shoulder to shoulder in matching steel bracelets. The moment the cuffs locked around Preston's wrists, the illusion of their high society marriage completely disintegrated. Preston twisted his head, glaring at Alicia with pure venom. You absolute idiot, he screamed at her, spit flying from his lips as he struggled against the agent's grip. Why did you not use a public computer? Why did you not scramble the digital footprint like I told you? You ruined everything. Alicia screamed right back at him, her face red and distorted with a mix of rage and terror. You told me it was safe, she shrieked, crying uncontrollably. You said nobody would ever check the metadata. You manipulated me into doing this. You ruined my life. I am going to tell them everything about your offshore accounts. I am going to testify against you to save myself. They stood there chained together by their own bottomless greed, viciously tearing each other apart as the agents began to recite their Miranda rights in perfect unison. You have the right to remain silent. The agents stated, their calm professional voices cutting through the frantic screams of the disgraced couple. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. My mother was still on the floor, covering her ears, with her hands sobbing hysterically as she watched her perfect world violently collapse into dust. The title agent, Mr. Caldwell, was pressed as far back into the corner as he could possibly go, clutching his real estate files to his chest, looking like he desperately wanted to sink into the wall and disappear. The federal agents did not wait for Preston and Alicia to stop fighting. They simply grabbed them firmly by the arms and began marching them forcefully toward the main doors of the conference room. Alicia was dragging her feet, wailing for our mother to do something, while Preston was shouting obscenities and demanding to speak to his corporate lawyers. The heavy wooden doors swung open, revealing a crowd of shocked office workers in the main lobby, all holding their smartphones up to record the spectacular, undeniable downfall of the city's most elite real estate broker. As the agents dragged the screaming couple out into the brightly lit hallway, a sudden sharp movement caught my eye. My father stepped forward from the corner of the room. He was trembling violently. His tailored suit rumpled his face, dark with a chaotic mix of grief and fury. He did not look at the federal agents. He did not look down at his kneeling wife. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. You destroyed this family. My father screamed, his voice cracking heavily under the weight of his absolute devastation. You sent your own sister to prison. You have no heart. I stood perfectly still, letting the echoes of my father's accusation fade into the heavy silence of the room. The frantic screaming from the hallway had finally been cut off by the closing of the elevator doors. The large conference room was suddenly vast and terrifyingly quiet. It was just the four of us left. Me, my father, Desmond, my mother, Vivian, who was still collapsed on the carpet, and Mr. Caldwell. The title agent was frantically and silently stuffing his real estate files into his leather briefcase, desperate to flee the blast zone of my family's total destruction. The soft metallic zip of his bag sounded like a gunshot in the still air. I slowly lowered my gaze to my mother, watching her shoulders heave as she sobbed into the floorboards, and then raised my eyes to meet my father's furious red-rimmed stare. I reached into the interior pocket of my tailored suit jacket and pulled out a small silver USB drive. I held it up between my thumb and index finger, letting the smooth metal catch the harsh fluorescent light of the office. I did not destroy this family, Dad, I said, my voice completely stripped of any daughterly affection, ringing with a clinical detachment. Mom destroyed it when she stole $200,000 from her sorority sisters to buy Alicia's affection. My father froze completely. The angry, righteous color that had painted his cheeks instantly drained away, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated confusion. His arm, which had been pointing so aggressively at my face, slowly dropped to his side. He looked down at Vivian, who was still kneeling on the floor. At the mention of the specific dollar amount, Vivian's entire body went completely rigid. The hysterical sobbing that had racked her frame just moments before stopped, instantly replaced by a suffocating, terrified silence. "What are you talking about, Renee?" My father demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh, gravelly whisper. "What money?" "Ask your wife, Desmond," I replied coldly, using his first name to sever whatever remaining familial bond existed between us. Ask Vivian how she managed to pay for Alicia's lavish European vacations, the designer handbags, and the exorbitant country club initiation fees when your own manufacturing business was struggling just to keep the lights on last year. You thought she was just being a savvy saver. You thought she was moving around her own inherited trust funds to help her favorite child maintain an illusion of extreme wealth. I took a slow step closer, forcing my father to look at the small silver drive resting in the palm of my hand. "She is the national treasurer for the most prestigious alumni sorority network on the East Coast," I explained methodically, laying out the facts like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "She has had direct, unsupervised access to their philanthropic endowment accounts for over a decade. And for the past 3 years, she has been quietly siphoning off donations meant for underprivileged scholarships and funneling them directly into a dummy account Alicia set up under a fake consulting firm." Vivian let out a strangled, animalistic gasp. She scrambled backward on her hands and knees, trying to put physical distance between herself and the undeniable truth. Her wide, terrified eyes were locked onto the USB drive, as if it were a venomous snake about to strike. "You checked the corporate filings," Vivian choked out, her voice trembling so badly she could barely form the words. "You said you only checked the deed for the house. You promised you were only looking at Preston and his real estate deals. You had no right to look at my accounts." "I never make promises to liars, Mom," I stated, simply enjoying the absolute terror radiating from her skin. "When I conducted the forensic audit to trace the fake earnest money Preston used, I had to trace the origins of every single bank account tied to Alicia's social security number. It took my private investigators exactly 3 days to find the gaping, bleeding hole in your sorority endowment fund. It took them another 2 days to trace the missing $200,000 directly into Alicia's personal spending accounts. You systematically stole charity money from your own community so your golden daughter could pretend she was royalty." Desmond looked like he was going to be physically sick. He stumbled backward, his hand catching the polished edge of the mahogany conference table to keep his knees from buckling. His entire worldview, his belief in his perfect elite family, was collapsing in real time. He looked down at his wife of 35 years, his chest heaving erratically. "Vivian, tell me this is a lie," he pleaded, his voice cracking with a desperate, pathetic hope. "Tell me you did not steal from your own sisters. Tell me you did not commit embezzlement just to buy Alicia more shoes and cars." Vivian could not even look at him. She just buried her face in her hands, letting out a pathetic, high-pitched whine that confirmed everything. The absolute shame of her guilt filled the room, heavy and suffocating. But I was not finished. I had endured a lifetime of their psychological torment, their endless favoritism, and their calculated cruelty. I was going to burn their false empire to the ground and salt the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. "Do not worry, though," I continued, pacing slowly around the edge of the table, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. "I did not give this particular drive to the federal agents who just hauled your son-in-law away. This is just a backup copy for my own personal records." Vivian looked up, a sudden, desperate spark of hope igniting in her tear-filled, bloodshot eyes. She wiped her face with the back of her trembling hand. "You kept it," she gasped, pulling herself up to lean weakly against the frosted glass wall. "You did not report me, Renee. You are going to keep it a secret. You are going to protect me. You are a good daughter." I stopped pacing and looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel like a worthless burden. I let a slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across my face. I did not give it to the federal agents, Mom. I clarified, keeping my tone light and conversational, stretching the moment out to let the anticipation build. I mailed the primary copies directly to the Sorority National Board of Directors yesterday afternoon. I sent a copy to the regional president, a copy to the Internal Ethics Committee, and a copy to the lead investigative reporter at the City Chronicle, who specifically covers high society charity fraud. They all received the complete unredacted financial audit via certified mail this morning at exactly 9 o'clock. The silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Caldwell actually stopped packing his briefcase, his hands frozen in midair, his eyes wide as he witnessed the total, undeniable annihilation of the Washington family legacy. Vivian's face turned a horrifying, unnatural shade of chalky white. All the color, all the life drained from her features in an instant. She clutched her hands tightly over her chest, her perfectly manicured fingers digging painfully into the expensive fabric of her designer silk blouse. She began hyperventilating, taking short, ragged breaths as her eyes darted wildly around the room. The reality of her total social destruction was actively crushing her chest. "My reputation!" Vivian gasped, struggling to pull enough air into her burning lungs. "My friends, the board members, they will ruin me. They will banish me from every country club and social circle in the entire state. I will have absolutely nothing left. My friends will completely abandon me." I looked at her without a single shred of sympathy, watching the decades of her toxic narcissism and shallow vanity finally cave in on itself. I felt a profound, settling peace, knowing I would never have to seek her approval ever again. "You have no friends, Mom," I replied, my voice echoing coldly through the empty room. "Only accomplices." My father watched his wife crumble against the frosted glass wall. The fight had completely drained out of my mother, leaving her an empty shell of the society woman she had always pretended to be. But my father was not ready to surrender. Desmond Washington had spent his entire life dominating every room he walked into, and he was not about to let his youngest daughter strip him of his patriarchal authority. He stepped right over my weeping mother and physically puffed out his chest. He adjusted the lapels of his tailored suit jacket, trying to pull his shattered dignity back together. He looked down his nose at me with eyes that burned with a desperate, furious pride. "We do not need your blood money, Renee." My father spat, his voice regaining some of its old booming cadence. "We still have the family estate. The house in the hills is our primary asset, and it is completely paid off." He took a step toward me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me the way he had when I was a child. "We will simply remortgage the property tomorrow morning," he declared loudly. "We will pull out the equity post Alicia's bail and hire the best federal defense team money can buy. We are going to save your sister, and when this is all over, we will never speak to you again. You are dead to this family." I did not flinch at his threat. I did not take a single step back. Instead, I felt a deep, genuine wave of pity wash over me. I looked at the man who had always demanded absolute perfection from everyone around him and saw nothing but a foolish, bankrupt old man clinging to a pathetic illusion. I shook my head slowly, letting a heavy sigh escape my lips. "Dad," I said, my voice quiet and completely steady in the large room, "the family estate is not paid off. You have not made a single mortgage payment in 8 months. My father froze instantly. The arrogant bluster evaporated from his face, replaced by a look of sheer panic. He darted a quick look at Mr. Caldwell, who was still trying to quietly sneak out the back door, and then looked back at me. I kept my eyes locked on his as I laid out the ugly financial reality he had been trying so desperately to hide from his country club friends. "You took out a massive third loan against the house 2 years ago just to pay for Preston and Alicia's luxury destination wedding in Italy," I explained calmly. "You drained every last drop of equity you had left to pay for the private villas, the imported flowers, and the champagne towers. You risked your entire financial foundation just to impress a bunch of high society snobs who do not even care about you. And when your manufacturing business started failing last year, you stopped paying the bank." My father opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He looked like he could not draw enough air into his lungs. My mother let out another soft whimper from the floor. The realization that her husband had secretly bankrupted them for the sake of appearances was the final nail in her social coffin. I turned away from my father and walked over to the mahogany conference table where my leather briefcase was resting. I unzipped the main compartment and reached inside. I pulled out a single stack of legal documents neatly stapled together with a heavy blue backing. I walked back over to where my father was standing and held the paperwork out toward him. When a homeowner defaults on a high-value mortgage for more than 6 months, I explained in a smooth, clinical tone the bank will often try to mitigate their losses by bundling the distressed debt and putting it up for private corporate auction. They did exactly that with your mortgage last month. They put the debt on your pristine suburban estate up for sale on the private market. My father stared at the documents in my hand, his eyes wide and unblinking. He refused to reach out and take them, as if touching the paper would make it real. And when they listed your debt, my limited liability company bought it. I told him, making sure the absolute finality of the statement sank into his mind. I purchased the entire note for pennies on the dollar through a blind corporate trust. I am literally your bank now, Dad. I own the paper on the family estate. Desmond Washington looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, feeling the ground finally give way beneath his feet. His knees trembled so badly that his perfectly creased trousers shook. He slowly reached out with a trembling hand and took the legal packet from me. He stared at the bold print on the front page, seeing my corporate seal stamped directly next to his home address. He saw my signature on the line identifying the primary lien holder. "And because you are currently 8 months in default," I said softly, delivering the final devastating blow. "I initiated foreclosure proceedings this morning." Desmond Washington physically stumbled backward, the heavy legal document trembling violently in his hands. The immaculate, powerful patriarch of the Washington family looked as though all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the room. He stared at the bold black print on the foreclosure notice, his eyes tracing the name of my limited liability company over and over again, completely unable to process the sheer magnitude of his defeat. He bumped heavily into the edge of the mahogany conference table, his pristine leather shoes scraping clumsily against the plush corporate carpet. His entire life, his towering pride, his carefully curated high society image, and the very roof over his head were now entirely in the hands of the daughter he had treated like absolute garbage for 30 years. "Mr. Caldwell?" The title agent finally managed to zip his leather briefcase shut. He did not say a single word. He did not offer a polite goodbye or try to shake anyone's hand. He practically sprinted for the heavy wooden doors, keeping his head down and his eyes firmly fixed on the floor, desperate to escape the toxic fallout of the Washington family collapse. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving us completely isolated in the tense, suffocating silence of the room. It was just the three of us now. The golden child and her criminal husband were gone, and the illusion of the perfect family had been stripped away completely. My father looked down at his wife. Vivian was still sitting on the floor, but the frantic energy of her previous panic attack had completely evaporated. She looked hollowed out, staring blankly at the frosted glass wall, as the crushing reality of their situation settled over her shoulders like a lead weight. They were officially losing everything. Their flawless golden daughter was currently sitting in the back of a federal vehicle, in handcuffs, facing serious prison time for interstate wire fraud and forgery. Their elite social reputation, the absolute center of their entire universe, was already shattered, completely destroyed by the embezzlement audit I had mailed to the National Sorority Board. And now the massive, sprawling suburban estate they used to host their exclusive charity galas and high society dinners was being ripped away from them. My father looked up from the foreclosure notice. The paper shook in his grip, rattling softly in the quiet room. "Renee," he whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves scraping against pavement. "Renee, you cannot do this to us. This is our home. This is the house you grew up in. This is the house where we raised you. You cannot just take it away from your own flesh and blood." I stood my ground, feeling a profound sense of closure washing over my mind. For 30 years, this man had dictated my worth. For 30 years, he had made me feel like an unwelcome guest in my own family, a disappointment who could never measure up to the brilliant, beautiful Alicia. He had allowed my mother to belittle me, and he had actively participated in trying to steal my only sanctuary. Now he was begging me for mercy. I did not smile. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at him with the exact same cold, clinical detachment he had always shown me. You have exactly 30 days to clear your junk out, I told him, letting the words hang in the quiet room. Desmond flinched as if I had struck him across the face. He recognized the words immediately. They were the exact words he had used against me on that miserable winter morning when he demanded I vacate my own apartment so Alicia could use it to house her purebred dogs while her mansion was being renovated. He had stood in my living room looking at my belongings with total disgust and told me to clear my junk out. "It is time to make a sacrifice, Dad." I continued quoting his own hypocritical lectures back to him. "Family requires sacrifice. That is what you told me, is it not? You told me I needed to step aside for the greater good of the Washington family name. You demanded that I give up my peace, my home, and my financial security to support your favorite daughter. You told me that my needs did not matter as long as Alicia was comfortable. Well, now the tables have finally turned. Now it is your turn to step aside and make a sacrifice for my financial security." Vivian let out a weak, pitiful moan from the carpet. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around her legs as she rocked slightly back and forth, entirely broken by the loss of her superficial kingdom. "The bank will give you exactly 30 days to vacate the premises before the local county sheriff arrives to physically remove your belongings from the property," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly professional and businesslike, exactly how he used to speak to me when denying my requests for college tuition assistance. "I highly suggest you start packing your things tonight. Those custom designer gowns, the crystal vases, and the country club golf trophies are going to take a very long time to carefully wrap and put into cardboard boxes. And you will not have Alicia's stolen money to hire a moving company this time." Desmond let the legal papers slip from his fingers. The stapled packet hit the floor with a soft slap sliding across the polished wood to come to a rest right next to Vivian's designer shoes. He took a slow, agonizing step toward me. His broad shoulders were completely slumped. The towering, intimidating figure of my childhood, the man whose disapproval used to make my stomach tie itself into terrified knots, was entirely gone. In his place stood a broken, defeated old man who had finally run out of innocent people to manipulate an offshore money to hide behind. He realized he had absolutely no leverage left. He could not threaten to disinherit me because I already had my grandmother's $4.5 million trust fund securely in my name. He could not threaten to ruin my reputation because I had built my corporate career entirely without his help or his connections. He had nothing left to offer, and nothing left to take away. He was completely powerless. Tears began to pool in my father's eyes. They spilled over his lower lashes, carving wet, shining tracks down his weathered, aging cheeks. His chest heaved with a sudden violent sob that seemed to tear its way out of his throat, completely shattering his stoic, patriarchal facade. He reached his hands out toward me, his fingers trembling in the sterile, air-conditioned air of the conference room. "Renee, please," my father cried out, dropping his heavy pride entirely as he broke down in front of me. His voice was a wretched, desperate plea that echoed pathetically off the frosted glass walls. "Renee, please do not do this to us. We are your parents. We raised you. We gave you life. You cannot put us out on the street like this. Where are we supposed to go?" My father was staring at the legal packet as if it were a poisonous snake, his hands trembling so violently that the foreclosure notice rustled in the quiet room. My mother had finally stopped screaming, her sobs turning into shallow, jagged gasps as she sat huddled on the carpet, looking at the man she had spent her life enabling. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own rhythmic, steady breathing. The power dynamics that had held this family together for 3 decades had completely dissolved. The fear that once defined my relationship with them had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. I looked down at them, the two people who had raised me to believe I was a permanent failure, and I felt absolutely nothing but a hollow, satisfied peace. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air with surgical precision. "Do you remember exactly what you told me when I was packing my bags in the middle of a blizzard last year? You said that being part of this family was a privilege, and that I had lost that privilege by failing to maintain the high standards of the Washington name. You said you were cutting me off for my own good to teach me a lesson about accountability." My father opened his mouth to protest, but the words died in his throat. He looked at the foreclosure papers, then at my face, finally seeing the woman standing before him. He saw someone who had not just survived their abandonment, but had methodically outplayed them at every single turn. "You told me that life is a series of transactions," I continued, taking a step toward him. "You told me that everything has a price, and that if you cannot pay the cost, you do not get to sit at the table. Well, I am simply applying your own logic. You failed to make your mortgage payments. You failed to honor your financial obligations. You treated our family home like an ATM to fund a lifestyle that was never yours to lead. And now the bank has liquidated that debt and I have purchased it." I reached into the side pocket of my coat and felt the crisp, folded paper waiting there. I pulled it out slowly, holding it up for them to see. "Yesterday, when you thought you still had the upper hand, you had the audacity to hand me this," I said. I held the piece of paper up, letting them recognize the check. "You threw this at me like I was a stray dog. $500. You told me to go buy myself something nice to stop being such a burden on the family budget, and to make sure I did not embarrass you during the holidays." I flicked the check with my thumb. It was such a generous gesture, was it not? $500 to buy my silence. $500 to ignore the fact that you were actively plotting to sell the house from underneath me. I let the paper drift from my fingers. It fluttered down through the air, landing softly on the carpet, resting directly between my mother's shaking hands and my father's scuffed shoes. It looked so small, so pathetic, resting there on the floor. "Here is your money back," I said, my tone as cold as winter frost. $500. Go to a spa, Mom. Go get a massage. Go buy a new bottle of expensive wine to numb yourself while you pack your life into cardboard boxes. But whatever you do, do not let your eviction get in the way of my Christmas." My mother let out a strangled, high-pitched noise, looking at the check on the floor as if it were an insult. She looked up at me, her eyes red and streaming her face a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. "Renee, how can you do this?" she whispered, her voice failing. "We are your parents. We gave you everything. You are supposed to be the one who cares for us in our old age. You are supposed to be our daughter." I crouched down slightly so I was eye level with her. "For 30 years, I gave you everything I had," I said. "I gave you my time, my labor, my loyalty, and my love. And you spent all of it on a son-in-law who was stealing you blind, and a daughter who was laughing at your expense. You never wanted a daughter. You wanted an accessory. And now the accessory has decided to stop playing along." My father took a shaky step forward, his hand reaching out in a gesture that was half grab and half plea. "Renee, please," he stammered, the patriarch finally begging for his life. "We have nowhere else to go. Claire is in rehab, Preston is in prison, and Alicia is facing federal indictment. Where are we supposed to go?" I stood up, feeling the immense weight of the last few years finally falling away. I thought about the nights I had spent alone in my office building the foundation of my own wealth. I thought about the cold, lonely holidays where they had invited me only to mock my career. I thought about the way they had watched me cry, watched me struggle, and decided I was simply not worth the investment. "That sounds like a problem for the family office," I said, gesturing vaguely toward the door. "You have 30 days to get your things out of my property. I suggest you use that time to find a studio apartment that fits your new budget. It is time to make a sacrifice, Dad. It is time to learn exactly what it means to be a failure in the Washington family." I did not wait for their response. I did not wait for the inevitable begging or the screaming or the threats. I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy wooden doors. I did not look back at the broken figures on the floor. I did not look back at the life I was leaving behind. I walked out of that office and into the lobby where the rest of my life was waiting for me entirely on my own terms. As the elevator doors slid shut, I felt the last pieces of the past lock into place. The check, the foreclosure, the audit. It had all been a game of strategy, and I had played it perfectly. The Washington family was done, and for the first time in my existence, I was finally, truly, perfectly alone. 6 months have passed since that freezing November night when the flashing red and blue lights faded down the country club driveway. The bitter winter eventually melted into a bright and vibrant spring, bringing with it a completely new reality for everyone involved. The spectacular downfall of my parents was not just a passing scandal, it was a permanent, absolute obliteration of the life they had worshipped above all else. Deanna and Roland did not escape the crushing weight of the federal justice system. The elite defense attorneys they desperately tried to hire demanded massive retainer fees they simply did not have. The court froze all their assets during the initial investigation, and the subsequent massive fines completely wiped out whatever tiny fraction of wealth they had tried to hide away. They were violently forced to sell absolutely everything they owned. The designer dresses, the luxury vehicles, the antique furniture, and the expensive jewelry. It was all abruptly auctioned off by the state to pay for their criminal restitution and legal penalties. They now live in a cramped, dimly lit two-bedroom apartment complex on the extreme outskirts of the city. The walls have peeling paint, and the relentless noise of the nearby interstate highway rattles their cheap, thin windows every single night. But the total financial ruin was not even the worst part for my mother. Her true ultimate punishment was the absolute social exile. The wealthy church aunties and the high society elites she had spent decades sacrificing her own daughter to impress completely erased her from their existence. When Deanna tried to attend a Sunday service 2 months ago, hoping to leverage some leftover sympathy, the ushers quietly but firmly asked her to leave the premises before she even reached the pews. The country club permanently revoked their membership and sent a public notice to the entire mailing list, actively separating themselves from the Blackwood scandal. She has absolutely nobody left to impress and nobody left to manipulate. She takes the public bus to the discount grocery store, clutching a cheap canvas handbag, entirely consumed by the bitter realization that her greedy obsession with status had left her completely destitute and entirely alone. Roland, who once walked around the golf course like he owned the entire city, now works the night shift at a local hardware store, sweeping floors and stocking shelves in complete silence under harsh, buzzing fluorescent lights. He refuses to look anyone in the eye, terrified he might recognize a former colleague. His arrogant thunder is entirely gone, replaced by a heavy, pathetic shuffle of a man who lost his soul to greed. My sister Sydney suffered an equally devastating reality check. Preston was officially indicted on 27 counts of federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and international money laundering. He is currently sitting in a maximum security federal penitentiary awaiting a trial that will inevitably lock him away for the next 2 decades. Sydney frantically filed for divorce the absolute second the FBI seized their bank accounts, hoping to save herself, but she could not escape the blast radius of his massive crimes. The authorities repossessed the sprawling mansion, the luxury sports cars, and every single piece of diamond jewelry bought with stolen investor funds. The golden child who had spent her entire life looking down her nose at everyone else was violently forced back down to earth. Today, Sydney works a minimum-wage retail job at a mid-level department store in the local shopping mall. She spends 40 hours a week wearing a stiff polyester uniform and a plastic name tag, folding sweaters and organizing clearance racks. The ultimate brutal irony of her new life is that she routinely has to ring up purchases for the exact same high society women she used to mock and belittle. They do not even bother to hide their smug pity when they hand her their platinum credit cards, looking at her perfectly manicured nails, now chipped and ruined by retail labor. Her extreme vanity was completely and utterly crushed under the unforgiving weight of a barcode scanner. She goes back to a tiny studio apartment every night, completely isolated and entirely forgotten by the glamorous world she thought she ruled. While they were suffocating in the miserable prison of their own making, my grandfather and I were finally breathing free air. The federal courts officially ruled that the $3 million Preston had blindly wired into my honeypot account legally belonged entirely to the irrevocable trust as direct compensation for the illegal demolition and structural damages. We did not use a single penny of that money to buy luxury cars or expensive vacations. Elijah and I sat down together at his old wooden kitchen table and mapped out a beautiful vision that would permanently secure our family history. We hired the absolute best historical restoration architects in the state and used the funds to bring the estate back to glorious life. We rebuilt the crushed brick walls, matching the original historical clay perfectly so that not a single scar remained on the structure. We restored the shattered stained glass windows, making them shine even brighter than before, casting warm, colorful light across the original oak floors that we had sanded and polished by hand. The sweeping wooden staircase was repaired, and the sprawling outdoor gardens were completely replanted with vibrant, blooming spring flowers. But we did not just rebuild a house. We transformed the entire massive property into the Elijah Trust Community Center, exactly what my grandfather had always dreamed it could be. He wanted his legacy to be something that actively protected the vulnerable, so we opened our wide oak doors to the underprivileged youth of the city. We built modern classrooms where teenagers can learn financial literacy, business ethics, and legal rights so that no predatory scammer can ever exploit them the way Preston tried to exploit Elijah. We created a sanctuary of knowledge and empowerment right in the heart of the neighborhood. The grand opening was held on a beautiful, warm Saturday afternoon. The very same investors who had nearly lost everything came to the ribbon-cutting ceremony, standing shoulder to shoulder with the neighborhood families to celebrate a true victory for the community. I stood on the wide wrap-around porch of the restored estate, watching the golden sunlight filter through the grand ancient oak trees. Elijah was standing right next to me, leaning on his cane, smiling brighter and looking healthier than he had in years. He proudly cut the thick red ribbon while the massive crowd cheered loudly, their voices echoing across the immaculate lawn. I looked at the heavy bronze plaque mounted next to the front door, bearing his name in bold, elegant letters. I am no longer the invisible daughter or the boring single accountant that my toxic family loved to ridicule and tear down. I found my immense strength in the quiet, neglected corners where they had abandoned me, and I used it to become the absolute protector of my family, true legacy. I looked out at the happy crowd, feeling the warm, gentle breeze brush against my face. I smiled a genuine, completely unguarded smile, knowing the heavy, toxic chains of my past were permanently broken, and I was finally beautifully free. The most profound lesson from this story is that true wealth and legacy are never defined by material possessions, stolen money, or superficial social status. Greed and vanity ultimately create a prison of isolation, as seen with the protagonist's toxic family who lost absolutely everything. In contrast, genuine power lies in resilience, integrity, and the courage to break free from generational toxicity. By choosing to restore her grandfather's estate and transforming it into a community center, the protagonist proves that real success is about protecting the vulnerable and leaving a positive mark on the world. You determine your own worth. Share your own story in the comments below if you have ever had to break free from toxic family expectations to build a life of true purpose,